Want to jam up the hill? You want to go jam up the hill? Come on, let's jam up the hill. I think that's what's going to keep you guys living a long time, jamming up the hill. Keep your legs strong. Like that. So, I don't know where I seen this material. It was, I don't know if it was the guy was, okay, well, first of all, the Lost Generation, which was the same generation that went to World War I, lived through the Great Depression, you know, World War I and the Roaring 20s and the Dirty 30s, the Great Depression era. Their children were called the Greatest Generation, which eventually went on to fight in World War II. When they returned home from World War II, they had the baby boomers, which was my parents' generation. And early sets of the baby boomers gave birth to my generation, which was Generation X. Okay? Then a combination of some Xers and some boomers kind of at the same time spawned the millennials. And then after the millennials, I guess it's called Gen Z or Zoomers. And I don't know where they get. I mean, the first few names made sense. Like, I don't know. It's like, I wish they'd come up with some more creative names. If I was going to name a whole group of people, I mean, hey, you know, let's make some a little more dignified. Like when they got the Generation X, it's like Brand X. Oh, what do we do with them? We don't know. But anyway, then now after Generation Z, it's like we can't decide what to keep calling them. So now we're going to go back to A. So I guess after them, they've already had Generation Alpha. So right now there's this not big, but it's for a long, long time, you actually had three generations existing in the workforce. You actually had the boomers, the the Generation X, and then of course the millennials came in after that. But if I go back to, like, say 1996, 1997, I had graduated the police academy, and the academy certificates were only good for, I think, 3 years. The boomers ruled the world then. They ruled the world all through the beginning of the millennium, and they continue to rule the world up into like their 70s and 80s. So they're just now, a few are starting to retire, but there's still many that just hang on in leadership positions. They're still there. And so what happened is, I'm just going to discuss a couple things. I just seen some material the other day where this kid came up. I don't know if he's a Zoomer. I don't know if he's a millennial. And he goes in and talks about how the millennials are becoming boomers, and boomers are the word for people that are old. No, the word for people that are old or old, elderly, the boomers are a specific generation that was born within a certain period of time. I'm not a boomer. I was born in 1974. I'm Generation X. But anyway, I graduated the police academy, and those certificates are like 2-3 years old. So I'm out looking for a job, and I'm working at this restaurant, and I'm about 23, and there's these kids that I was working with there, and I guess they're still kind of like late Generation X, or maybe early millennial bracket. And I went ahead and I was working there, and I listened to this crap from them saying that I was old. So if a bunch of millennials are telling Zoomers that they're old, if I was the Zoomers, I wouldn't listen to it, because they had these kids I was working with at this minimum wage job telling me that I was at 24 or 23, I was old. And okay, so I wouldn't listen to none of that crap. And so yeah, I was going to say that I think it was the millennials. Yeah, the millennials are being called boomers, which are old, but it's not that old. Millennials aren't boomers. Millennials are millennials. Boomers are boomers. Generation X is Generation X. Millennials are millennials. Zoomers are zoomers, and alpha is alpha. Past a certain age, and all of a sudden they get the boomer crown hung on them. And for a long time, the boomers ran the world. And the boomers really ran public safety, and they really ran law enforcement for a long time. And it wasn't until recently that a lot of them finally got out, that finally retired. I mean, they stayed in the workforce for a long time. And so the beef is, I guess, there's animosity between the millennials, Gen Z, and the boomers. And now, all of a sudden, some of these elements are starting to come after the Generation X. Well, Generation X, we didn't get anything. I said this in videos in the past, Generation X didn't have permission to comb their hair or tie their shoes. Generation X, Generation X was told to show up at this time and go home at this time and do everything we're told to do in between. And I had a couple Generation X bosses at a couple minimum wage jobs I had in the past. But really, more often than not, it was boomers at the top telling everybody what to do. And they ran organizations and institutions for years. And by the time a lot of the Generation X, slipped in and became bosses, we were only there for maybe 5 years, 6 years max before a lot of us started retiring. Last job I had, when I left, the boomers had retired. My buddy took off. He was Generation X, and it was millennials running the show. A lot of us millennials running the show. Get over here. I don't want you parking there. Come on. The boomers ran the show for years. And so I see a few people starting to come after Generation X. And I remember, there's Generation X's out there that never clawed their way up to a middle class position, who never worked over $15 an hour in their whole life. And now, just because we're the oldest, in theory, we're supposed to have amassed the total amount of wealth. Not all the time. This is not financial advice, but the only time I started accumulating anything was the last 4 years maybe, and I just decided that basically after COVID, especially after COVID, my strategy was to accumulate everything that I could in the way of, money and things that are worth money, that can be sold, so I could insulate myself from me and the rest of the world and the risks of the rest of the world. So I can leave a job, when the pandemic blows in, when a new pandemic blows in, or something comes in, or some trouble comes in. I can go and live off some money. I can float on some money for a while. I'm all about money. I'm all about financial security, and I'm all about financial security for me. I don't have any more room on this spaceship. I try to get married and try to talk it up, whatever. Hey, there's only one ship. There's only one seat in this spaceship. I built this spaceship for one person. I'm taking one ride, and that's me. It's like, well, you have a few $100,000. Can I come along? Fuck no, you can't come along. You can't come along because it's all factored in just for me. My retirement, everything's factored in just for me. And I think what's happened here is that a lot of the millennials out there have gotten wind of this. Millennials, I read an article that said recently the millennials are like, the average millennial has $100,000 net worth. Maybe some of them do, but I like to know. I still want to know what the student loans were originally spent on. Was it really spent on education? Was it really spent on units for school? Was it really spent on school books? I want to know what it was really spent on. Or was going to some kind of rave or a music festival considered an educational expense? Or was some kind of life coach retreat considered an educational expense? I mean, what's considered educational expenses? And I'd like to know, what's been fueling a lot of these industries And I'd like to know why so many of these millennials claim they're broke. I like to know why. I like to know where the student loans came from. And the plan is to try to fleece retirement. At first, the target was the boomers. And I tell you right now, if they're thinking Generation X, I mean, they're really scraping bottom of the barrel. They're real desperate if they're thinking Generation X. Because Generation X was never groomed for leadership. Generation X was never allowed to get on its feet. Generation X was cut off at the knees the moment it even got anything close to getting on its feet. And the minute a Generation X's ankles would straighten up, someone would come along and knock us over again. And usually that other person was the boomers, or it was the boomers' grandchildren, the millennials, because in America, people hate their children, but they love their grandchildren for some reason. Okay? So that's what a lot of it was. Yeah, and my dad died. He left me a bunch of fucking junk. He left me a bunch of old wrenches and pipes and tubing benders, and I mean it took me it took me like 4 days to clean out the corner of the garage. I filled up a whole residential dumpster with just cleaning the corner of our garage with all the shit he accumulated through the years. And my neighbor was out there, and I said, "What do you think? What do you think of my inheritance? Look at this wealth I have here. Look at all these collector items I have here. What do you think of that? What do you think? Aren't I rich? Aren't I rich now?" And he just kind of smiled and shook his head. Look at this. Look at this wealth I inherited. Look at this. Look at that. Look at this greatness I was bequeathed. And because not all boomers are stereotypical and or in positions of power and wealth either. Some boomers spent their money as fast as they made it. Especially if they're members of the middle class. And I think a lot of people, and even including myself, when the 1990s rolled around and I see these houses for sale, I always thought houses and properties and jobs and the future would always be accessible if I worked hard enough. First I had a concept. I had like a small concept of entitlement where I wanted to go be an explorer. And it was some smaller agency, and they said, "Well, you can go ahead and you can work your way up." And I'm like, "Why? I just go ahead and apply for the agency I want." Well, I didn't have a concept of working my way up. But after a while, I learned, no, I have to work my way up. I have to wait in line. I have to wait my turn. And if I had any entitlement mindset, my entitlement mindset went from maybe a couple of years. It took me like a year and a half to 2 years to figure that crap out. And I knew, I better change my ways or I'm in trouble. And I never stepped on no one's toes. I wasn't bitter about it. I just accepted it for what it was and got on with my life. I never let my entitlement negatively affect anybody. Okay? There's some people nowadays that their entitlement bleeds off and strangles everyone around them. It's toxic. I had an entitlement, maybe lasted a year and a half, and I got over that crap real quick, and I got in line and tried to work my way up like everybody else, but that didn't work either. And I've always found out that a lot of times in an endeavor, it's any endeavor, group project, etc., it's the first 10 minutes that determines a person's position in that project unless it's appointed by an overseer. Notice a couple guys will kind of nudge each other and get together real quick, and they'll run off and start doing the best job they can find. It's just people rushing out and getting the best jobs, but it's easy to get run over in that environment. And the same with the workplace. If I start pushing a broom, people start seeing me push a broom, then I'm the guy that pushes the broom. Well, he's always cleaning. He's like a janitor. People do see other people for the things they do, and that becomes their identity, often cases. So it is what it is. But this whole thing my whole point of this stuff is that when a person gets a certain age, they're not a boomer. Okay, Generation X isn't a boomer, because what it is the boomers are being vilified. the boomers are being vilified. So gee, Generation X didn't do anything. Generation X didn't have shit. Generation X didn't get on its feet. Generation X wasn't allowed to do any. So anyway, the whole point though is that my whole point, getting back to what I was going to say, as the boomers are the boomers. My whole point, getting back to what I was going to say, the boomers are the boomers, and Generation X is Generation X. And since the boomers have been kind of on the receiving end of this, I think it's an endeavor to fleece them of wealth, divert the wealth of the old into the coffers of the young, so the young can get their debts excused. That's what I think a lot of it is. Okay, so, and with Generation X kind of never being for the most part involved with a lot of that. Generation X was basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that Generation X are boomers now, the millennials are boomers now, and anybody above a certain age is now a boomer. No, it's not. The boomers were a specific generation that was born after World War II. And their children are Generation X, and then Generation X, millennials are a compendium between the kids of Generation X and the kids of the boomers. Because some boomers waited till later in life after they were on their feet to have children. But the thing is that having kids back then may have not been that hard. And buying a house wasn't that hard. And finding opportunities wasn't that hard. Back then it was easy to apply for a job. I'd go in and meet with the person. If they liked me, they'd hire me. If not, they didn't. But at the same time in the 1990s, it was hard to find jobs. Because a lot of times the good jobs, the boomers ran that shit with an iron fist. They only liked their own coming in. And sometimes, they give one of us a chance or something. But for the most part, the boomers like the boomers coming in. And when I talk to boomers to this day, a lot of times, if there's 2 or 3 boomers around, then it's the odd man out thing. Start talking about stuff, and if I remember my mom mentioned that, they don't want me part of that conversation. Because the boomers, for the most part, like to be around other boomers. Even if I know what a howdy doody doll is or the Lone Ranger was. So, but I think it's just a way for a lot of these younger people that are in these debts that are unexcusable to get sympathy, so they can hopefully get those debts excused. That's what I think a lot of that is. But just because a person gets above a certain age doesn't mean they're a boomer. Generations are specific. A person who's above a certain age might be considered elderly or old. Okay? They're not boomers. And just because, the stigmatism of boomers, wasting their money, and having detached buildings in their backyards of their single-story homes. I've seen boomers, baby boomers, where I go to their house, and they've had whole shops behind their house. They'll have like a small, modest home, then they'll have a shop, a steel building behind their house that's bigger than an auto garage on Main Street of any town. Like, first time I seen that was in the 80s. I went back to the house. I said, well, what is this? He said, that's my dad's shop. I thought, this is as huge as a regular auto garage I'd find downtown my town that would work on cars commercially. And that's what a lot of the boomers, quite a few of them, spent their money on. And their kids can get a little bit of money for stuff like that, but maybe not. I was buying some silver coins. There was it was an NGC set. And my dad said, well, this is not financial advice once again, but my dad said, well, those coins are a bad investment. And I looked at him, I said, you have never invested anything in your life. This is before I had stocks or anything. Stocks were harder to get back then. People had to have a lot of money in their accounts. They had things like day techs, these day trading platforms coming on, but for the most part, people went to brokers and they had to have 10 grand to start a brokerage account. A lot of younger people, they didn't have money like that. If I have a house, I'm almost scared. I mean, I'll pay that property tax and everything because I know damn well if I miss the payments and that house gets sold in the courthouse, some boomer is going to be there to snatch it up and flip it. Because they're older and they need the money now. Quiet. No. Come on, up the hill. Let's go. Jam up the hill. But a lot of it is that. So, anyways, greatest generation, baby boomers, Generation X, Millennials, Gen Z, Generation Alpha. Don't worry about the haters. Just let the haters worry about you. See you on the next one.